If you see him, can you get him in here?
I'm not sure how much I have to disagree with you. So
I figure you're the one who knows him, so. That's good. Is that on? Hi. How's it going? Good. Good to see you.
Just trying to figure out what we're talking about. But okay.
Yeah, it'll unfold.
I have all the questions you're saying.
You're good. I've got to say, I milk that periodic table like you'd never believe.
So we have a new website coming out.
Oh,
To
good.
animate it behind it. It's not animate, to
Awesome.
add the material that's sitting behind it to
Yeah.
make it forward facing.
Beautiful. But,
Hello.
hi,
So
how are you?
Listen, so I'm trying to remember where we met.
We met this past week.
We have.
We have, but I think it was maybe 3 years ago, but I'm not sure.
Hello again.
I don't know. I don't spend much time in New York, so.
I don't spend much in Palo Alto. Every once in a while, but
I
it's
worked
been
at
a while.
CBS too a long time ago. But that was
Maybe that was it.
Or you could have been, the time that you were working was the time that you
99 when I got
came
here,
to,
but I don't know. I felt like I wasn't even.
So
Oh wait,
you
yeah.
were working at BJ then.
99
so
I
many
was.
evolutions.
She was working at CBSC. I bet you were like at some kind of fellowship with attorney thing together.
That could have been it. Hello again. All right. Let's focus on this thing.
Colt. How are you guys?
Can I make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes.
Lau Levy.
La la vie.
Lau Levy.
Like French. La vie.
I can do that. I'm glad I asked.
Thank you. I'm okay with many beautiful manipulations of my name. I get Amichai, Omaha, Leo, Levi. So, thanks, Stacy.
Okay.
Delighted. She likes purses. We're working on underwood costume for Halloween.
All right, I'm going to invite everybody to take their seats. We're going to get started here in just a sec. Figure out how to do the microphone. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stacy Garnett Cook, and I am the National Director of the Interfaith Family Your Community Initiative. Is the mic picking me up at this point? Yes. Okay, great. So I have the privilege of working with our interfaith family directors around the country. These are rabbis who practice radical inclusion and work with interfaith couples and families every day. So in my role, I get to learn from them and think strategically about how we can have the biggest impact on interfaith families and their varied Jewish journeys. The topic we're here to talk about today, what Judaism has to offer interfaith families, like myself and my husband, and why we would want to engage in Jewish life, is one of the questions that comes up inevitably in this work. In some ways, this is a question that the Jewish community is asking in general about what will engage a new generation of Jewish families, not just interfaith families. It's an important question for all Jewish organizations to consider. However, as is often the case, the interfaith families bring a particular set of needs and perspectives to this question. We're in a time when what it looks like to be Jewish is changing. The opportunity we have is to learn from interfaith families and what attracts us to Jewish life. This can spur innovation and it can enrich Jewish life in new ways. We have the opportunity to share what is best in Jewish culture and Jewish tradition. And I think that what's attractive to interfaith families will be attractive to other parts of the Jewish community as well. So I'm excited to have such a wonderful group of leaders here to have this discussion with today. On the panel, we have John Wucher of the Lippman Kampfer Foundation for Living Torah, Rabbi Avi Orlo of Foundation for Jewish Camp, Reverend Eleanor Harrison Bregman of Romamu, Rabbi Amichai Lau-Levi of Lab Shul, and Rabbi Michael Copeland, Director of Interfaith Family San Francisco Bay Area, my colleague. And we'll also have a comment from Rabbi Nadia Saritsky of the Society for Classical Reform Judaism. So, as is the case throughout the conference, all of their bios can be found in your guidebook app. And here's how this is going to run. Each panelist is going to have 5 minutes to present and make their main points. Then I'll call on our commentator, and I'll ask a couple of questions of the panel and then open it up to the room for questions. And we will have a couple of people bringing mics around at that point. So I'll be keeping a close eye on time along with our timekeeper, and I know our panelists will as well. So we make sure that we have ample time at the end to take questions from the audience. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Jonathan Mucher to start us off.
Sounds like the mic is definitely on. There aren't many rooms in which I need a microphone, I've learned over the years, but I'll use it because it's here. First of all, thank you. I very much appreciate the invitation to be part of this panel as the one who came without a title. Not rabbi, not reverend, but I do think that what you stated at the outset, that there's a lot that we can learn, not just about working with interfaith families, but about Jewish life in general from this conversation, and hopefully that's something we'll all be able to take away. So I want to begin actually with a proposition, a premise that Karen Cohen articulated earlier today, and that is that all of us as human beings share basic drives, basic motivating factors in our lives. All of us desire for our lives to be meaningful, to have a purpose, to leave a legacy. All of us desire to connect with others, to have positive relationships, to be part of community or communities. And if you take these first two propositions and put them together, it leads to another, which is that we have a desire to to connect ourselves to something greater than ourselves. And finally, we have a desire for what I call a sense of agency and efficacy. We want to have a measure of control over our lives and to feel that we are, or at least we can be, successful in things that matter to us. Now, framed this way, these sound very abstract. We have these desires for meaning, for relationship, for agency or efficacy, but they play out in our lives in very concrete ways. For example, in the desire to be good parents, or in wanting to feel comfortable and competent in settings in which we find ourselves. I would venture to say that one of the things that keeps many people, for example, out of synagogues is the fact that they don't feel competent in that setting. And why would you want to put yourself in a situation where you're going to be squirming and suffering for some significant period of time? So, though these are basic human drives, they're drives that find expression in virtually everything that we do, in our day-to-day lives, in our relationships, in our work, in our passions. And the question, of course, then becomes, well, how do we, in fact, meet these needs, respond to these desires? And so the corollary to my first proposition is that to the extent that Jewish life, and by Jewish life I mean its ideas, its practices, its people, and its institutions, to the extent that these can help us to fulfill any of these desires, to meet any of these needs, or respond to any of these drives, then we're likely to engage in them. But to the extent that Jewish life does not do this, we're far less likely to be involved. Now, I think the good news is that there's an enormous amount in Jewish life that can, in fact, help people satisfy these fundamental desires. We find this in Jewish concepts and values. We find it in rituals and practices. We find it in the multiple forms of community that are available in Jewish life. But this doesn't happen automatically, and that's really the key. People, whether in interfaith families or not, need to be exposed to these in ways that are both skillful and sensitive. That's where the rub comes, because to say that Jewish life has the potential to help us fulfill some of these basic needs doesn't mean that, in fact, Jewish life is going to be doing this for any particular individual or couple or family. Now, for interfaith families, there are obviously also specific contextual factors that come into play as they seek to satisfy these fundamental needs or desires, mostly flowing from the fact that one of the partners is not Jewish. So how Jewish institutions or leaders or other Jews, other individual Jews with whom interfaith families and the members of interfaith families come into contact respond to these specific factors and the concerns that are likely to come with them is also important. It's not enough to say, okay, well, we have these opportunities to fulfill these basic desires. Again, it's a question of, can we help these particular people fulfill these desires? So, for example, is the non-Jewish partner also able to meet some of his or her basic